And now let's move on to the next panel. The area of AI is very much upon us, and there is no way you're not talking about it if you're online. What's more, there's no way to keep it out of sports too, as our next speakers will let us know right now with this panel session, Football and AI. It has come to a point where you're seeing AI make an impact for where the football world wants to invest too. So for this very important discussion, I would like to welcome now on stage the following speakers. We'll have Yacine Alaoui, Director Strategy and Development, OGC Nice. Michael Broughton, Partner Sports Investment Partners, LLP. Also, Stef Strack, Founder and CEO of Voice in Sport. Luis Vicente, Chairman, Apex. And the moderator, who is Zubair Timol, Partner and Global Vice President, Culture at Meltwater. Please round of applause for all of them. Un aplauso para los siguientes ponentes, por favor. Bienvenidos, welcome everyone. Hello, thanks for joining us in this 8th edition. Hello everyone, hello. Thank you. So let's get started with football and AI. Zubair, all yours. Thank you, see you later.
Thank you so much. So just to set the context, we are here in Sevilla talking about the impact of data and AI. Our collective goal as a panel is to ensure that we share anecdotes to make the language of AI and data and analytics a lot more understandable for the audience here as well. I think a good way to kick things off is just maybe to take 1 minute per panelist and for you to share your experience with football and AI, be it good or bad. And Luis, let's start with you.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So it's, I think it's our 8th edition, right, Michael? So I think it's always great to come to Seville and be with the World Football Summit family. I will maybe tell you 2 stories about AI and AI impact in football, being an old guy and being for so many years in the sport. But I'm very proud that I win already about 35 times the Spanish league on Football Manager. So that's a great effectively application of AI in football, even despite this is a game. But effectively, not many years ago, used to be the most efficient and, in fact, the most realistic database that existed in the world of football, right? So again, for instance, Manchester City, 2009, we were using Football Manager.
Oh, wow. So you were using Football Manager
yes.
at Manchester City?
Yes, yes. That was the prehistory of performance analytics, right? So, and that was the best database, right? So again, not many people will ever realize that the game could be so real, right? But the fact that that game was the best. And I'll say that, if there was AI on my times in Manchester City as well, maybe we'll have lose all that fun of Manchester City beating Manchester United in the last match of the season, 3 minutes in added time, and when United was already celebrating, in Sunderland, thinking that they won the league. If there was AI at the time, again, the odds probably will say that this was going to happen and it will take all the fun. But, I think it's good that today, we have so much more accuracy, in what we expect from a sports result in a sports event.
Absolutely. That's a great way to kick things off. Stef?
My experience with AI in football goes back, all the way from my early time growing up in Alaska. So I started playing football when I was 4 years old. And it's a miracle, honestly, with the scouting techniques back then and what I barely knew about my body as an athlete, that I made it to Division I football. When I made it to Division I football, I still didn't know anything about my body. There was basic statistics, nothing about menstruation and performance or about how to really leverage the game in my training and recovery. So that was my experience in my first, 25 years. I then went into Nike and I was head of global football footwear product. And even then, in the early 2000s, we were just using basic analytics. We started to use biomechanical data to create our products, but it was so basic. We had a few sensors that we would, also interpret in terms of player movement on the field, and that would lead to some insights around product creation. And we were working with the best footballers, here in Europe. Spent time with Maldini, with Ronaldinho, but we were still pretty old school. Fast forward to today, and I'm building a digital platform for women athletes. And now my perspective with AI in football is one of data scarcity, one of biases, and underinvestment. So I'll talk about that today, but it's a reality within women's football and AI that data is a super scarce item.
Okay, well, over to you now, Michael. I mean, we've had a strong start
I've got two quick anecdotes for you, not necessarily directly with football, but the first one was 2020, I'm talking to the CEO of a Formula One team, and he was bragging to me about the 3 billion data points they picked up every weekend. So I said, well, what's your AI strategy? And I just had this blank stare back at me. And I was like, okay, well, we can't figure out what to do with that data. You're going to need, and you might not be applying AI today, but you need to have one because it's coming. It's just inevitable. The other one was, I got approached by somebody saying, I've got a billionaire, loads of money, he wants to buy a football club, can you help? Obviously the answer is yes. What have you done to check on him? He's clean, I can't find anything about him on the internet. And well, that's suspicious if you can't find anything, so let's have a look. And Google was clean. Couldn't find him, I mean, there was nothing. And so I went on Gemini, and I went on to ChatGPT, and I asked questions like, is he sanctioned, why, da da da. And I got this amazing thesis paper on him, where he came from, why he was sanctioned by the US and the EU, where the court case was at, what the business was, what the relationship was with Putin. That, I mean, just never ending. I'm like, well, it's all out there. I just couldn't find it as I looked for it. So to me, it was like that completely changed the way how I research and do any form of diligence.
Yeah, and it goes to show just how much information is out there if you know what you're looking for and how to utilize it. Yacine, offering the football club's perspective.
Sure. It's hard to go after these guys and these amazing stories, but I think I'll just give you one concrete example of the first time I was, let's say, introduced or facing AI. I was working back then at the sports advisory arm of KPMG, and one day the partner came to me and told me, look, Yacine, I want you to be in charge of that special project we're going to have, which is developing a play evaluation algorithm. So basically based on all the sports performance, data, contract duration, nationality of players, etc. A lot of, let's say, different KPIs and variables to be able to determine and to predict the value of a player on the markets. And back then, so that was in 2017, 2018. So obviously there was the potential, let's say, to go with AI solutions that were already in the market, but that was not the burgeoning, but it was still the early stages. So we spoke to a couple of companies. We felt it was not ready yet, and eventually we did it, let's say, in-house with a data science team of KPMG. But that was, again, 7-8 years ago. I think if the project was given to me now and to the team, I think there wouldn't be a single doubt, really. We would go, I mean, because you just have now so many providers, so many players on the market working out those solutions that it has become, let's say, almost commonplace, if I would say. And it just, I think, shows the pace at which this technology has grown, and also especially how the football industry as a whole has embraced it. So I think that's a lot of positivity around this, but probably also a lot of, let's say, bumps in the road and pitfalls that we should, let's say, as a whole, all the stakeholders avoid. So I guess we're going to talk about this today as well.
Sure. So, I mean, just to leverage on that point, we've just answered that question. We've had stakeholders, Putin, Maldini, and Manchester City. I would say this really gives us an insight in terms of what type of rabbit hole that we're going into. Luis, if I could spin it back to you, from an investment standpoint, what are you looking at some of the trends in terms of how to leverage data and AI to make investment decisions into sport and entertainment? I mean, you sit across a wide portfolio of sporting properties.
Yeah. No, look, I think the interesting thing about sports is there is such a wide usage of AI, right, for so many years, right? So, and again, I think many times the normal fan doesn't even realize how AI is so much already in their lives. And effectively, when they are enjoying that sports moments, how AI it's already bring them so many different experiences and so many different value points. And normally, you tend just only to speak about AI in sports when the media starts talking about it. And there is, of course, a big discussion worldwide about AI, the dangers or no dangers of using AI. So for us, at Apex has been, I'll say that first of all, I believe in every business we invest today, there is a big AI component. Also on the way that we use AI, in terms of, improving our efficiency on searching for the right companies, as well, taking the right, approach into those companies when we invest on them, and also supporting them across, their business development has been effectively very important. I think as well, even on the way that we create, or intensify our network relationships, I think today, again, even if you go as something as simple as LinkedIn, right, where there is a massive AI component backing it up. Again, so maybe today LinkedIn is one of the best, examples or cases of usage of AI on creating sports networks and intensifying, basically those relationships. I think when you come at an event like this and you see the amount of, visitors that we have here, attendees, professionals of the industry, technology, creators, startups, etc. They are all embedded in AI, right? So again, they are using, of course, the app, that World Football Summit produces. They try to see, okay, who they want to meet. They use different resources across digital to find those persons, to get in touch, and to try to have a chance of showcase, their products, what they are. So I think it's an incredible opportunity. I think it's, at least even for me personally, I would say that gives me a lot more firepower to take best decisions. I think it's a conduit, not a solution on itself, right? But I think there's still nothing that replaces your experience, your life know-how, and your journey. But I think AI is here definitely to provide much more efficiency and much more accountability as well on the decisions that you take.
Yeah, I love that. AI is a conduit, right, rather than the end product. I'm going to spin it across to you, Michael, here. Like, you're also looking at the investment spectrum across the board. You're meeting with plenty of founders, C-suites. How important is it to be data literate within the top tier of an organization? And if that tier isn't necessarily well-versed, how long does the upskilling process take?
Yeah, I'm not fussed if they're data literate. I need to know that they understand they need it and that they've hired the right people. Any presentation that starts with a buzzword, I immediately am dubious about. What I want to know is, what's the problem, what's the solution? Right? How do I build a platform that enables women's football? Great, that's a problem that needs solving. What sits underneath it? What's the data set? Is there a need for AI? Is it a co-pilot in that it's assisting? Do they understand that they don't need necessarily to hire 100 engineers, because actually just looking at what Amazon are putting out there about the number of people they've been able to get rid of because they have effectively a co-pilot helping write a lot of the code for them. So if they can understand that and articulate that, and then typically in sport, it's how do you take something that is aimed at a very clear and defined niche to how do you take that to a much broader market. So I'm a big fan of the Zone 7 injury performance product, right? And a lot of good clubs, Liverpool, use this to decrease the number of non-contact injuries. And I sit there going, well, that's great, but even if you get the entire football community in terms of professional clubs, none of whom want to pay a very big license fee, what's growth mean? Now, if you can embed that into all of women's football, that's scale. So they don't need to have that solution straight away, but they need to be able to say, oh, and by the way, they may say, AI will be a tool that we can then enable to power X.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, I think just leveraging off that point as well, Stef, coming into you, you are working with AI and technology. What's your take on its impact on the potential of the women's game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably most excited about two areas on the impact of AI for women's football. The first one is on the technical side for the players, and the second one is really on the engagement side for the fans. So first on the technical side, right now we're starting to see AI models that are built using women athletes and their data, whereas historically it's mostly been on male athletes. So we're combining biometric data with biomechanical data and then layering in the hormonal realities of women, that we have a menstrual cycle and our hormones fluctuate. So when you start putting all of those pieces together and start building the right models with the right data, which I'll talk about later, that's when you're going to have incredible impact on how players train, how they sleep, and I'm talking women athletes, and also how they recover. And unfortunately, we've seen the news across so many women's football players in the last year, because it's more visible now more than ever, that women athletes are having a higher rate of ACL injuries, about 2 to 8 times that of male athletes. And when you think about why, I really don't think it's all a biomechanic scenario. I think it's because we're not training women athletes in a way that is really fueled by data that's informed by their bodies. So I think that's like the number one that I'm most excited about, how AI is going to change the game. The second is on the engagement side for the fan. You know, right now we know that only 15% of sports coverage goes to women. And it's come a long way in the last couple years, but now imagine with AI what we're going to be able to do. We're going to be able to use AI algorithms and models to create more content on women. And when we have more content, then the fan is going to decide that they actually want to watch women's sports. So we'll be able to reduce some of the biases that sit high up in these organizations. And the second part is really the ability to make sure that we can engage more interestingly with these women athletes. So the more stories and the better that we know the women athletes, the more interesting the game is. And you're starting to see that come into play. So I'm excited about those two areas.
Mm-hmm. So Luis, just before I head across to Yacine, so on that content piece, specifically in relation to women and female football, you're obviously now a lot more involved in that particular sector as well. What's your brief take on the potential runway we have to really make a huge impression across the board?
Look, I think women's sports, and in this case specifically women's football, because we're in a football event, potential is enormous, right? So I think for me, I say this for many years, I think the real potential of football is not on what used to call the premium football, right? It's not on the top of the pyramid, because in football we always have pyramids. You know, for everything and anything, there's always something in the top, something in the bottom. And, you know, I've said that me and Michael always work with a reverse pyramid, right? So where effectively women's football, amateur football, and, you know, I'll say virtual football was on the top, right? So because that's where the mass participation is and where the big numbers are. That's where the people that really live and breathe football 24/7, 365. And I think, you know, today I've been seeing this incredible movement, you know, taking shape. We are very proud of what is happening, but you know what is very interesting is only the beginning, right? So the potential is unique. And you're talking about, first of all, a long journey, right? Which I think a lot of people that today are very excited about women's football don't realize the length of the journey, right? So you need to have a long-term perspective, you have to have a long-term commitment, and this is essential. You're building a new market and a new audience, and you need to basically understand and test how you're going to service, and content plays a massive, important part on that. I think having worked in my life with so many male and female athletes, I see a big difference between the two, right? Because if I ask a male athlete to do something from a content perspective, you will grumble, you will just say, yes, and now I have, you know, something to do. Can it be tomorrow? Can it be after tomorrow? Again, in Manchester City, we had, for instance, Mario Balotelli that always said that he was going to do it, and then he was running away. So on the time we're going to shoot anything. So with the female athletes, effectively, you know, it's not just that they are totally open to do it, you know, as they are always pushing, you know, everyone to do more, right? And the richness of the stories, the richness of the storytelling, you know, the movement where they feel part of is an incredible power, right? And I think you need to feed this audience, right? Because for me, content has always been a currency of engagement, a currency of trade. And of course, I think AI can play a massive important role, because one of the biggest issues we have today is not effectively, you know, how much content we have, because we have tons of content. Mm-hmm. Is the relevance of content, and also how can we feed the world and the world of creators, right? I'm not just talking now about the big creators, but I'm talking effectively of the world we live today, where everyone is a creator, right? Where micro creators are everywhere. And effectively, we need to allow that content to be more visible. I remember, for instance, when we were in FIFA, we had a project called the FIFA Fan Movement, where we used to receive sometimes 10,000, 12,000 pieces of content a day. You know, there's effectively no way, except you have a really good AI model, that you can create that. And of course, the opportunities that you have today in terms of remote production, you know, virtual creation, and so just open up this. Because the biggest piece as well that content can serve is how can we really transform the appetite for loyalty that exists in the female audience into something very meaningful, and something that effectively will have a massive contribution in the business model of women's football as an industry.
Yeah.
If I could add to that, there's I think the opportunity when you think about how we have all this content, but then how does it get programmed for like mass distribution? And there's a lot of bias in the old, kind of the old school way of programmatic kind of approach. So imagine if you could have an AI equal coverage algorithm in place for your executives that are making the decisions around what goes on the primetime spots for women's sports and men's sports. And if that AI-powered model was then used with a human to also make that decision real time on fan engagement and interest in sports, do you think we would have men's bowling at primetime versus global football for women anymore? Probably not, right? So I think that that's the power of AI if you use it in the right way to get after some of these like massive problems that have existed for, you know, a couple decades.
Yeah, and speaking of using AI in the right way, from a club's perspective, Yacine, maybe you can give us insight in terms of how is AI being used to impact player performance and generally in your role as a strategic director?
Sure. I think our positioning at the club at UGC Nice is that we're in, let's say, in constant monitoring and assessing the opportunities in terms of AI and how to use it both for on-pitch topics or off the pitch. The reality is that we haven't yet, for different reasons, which I'll come back to, let's say, implemented, let's say, an overarching or a full overhauling strategy around AI and how to implement it in every department or back-end operations of the club. Obviously, there's the TV rights context for the French market, which has taken its toll on a lot of clubs, including us. So that's something that basically we have to deal with as when we work on those topics and operational efficiency at the club. But there's also something that, just coming back to what Michael was saying before, is that we've done, let's say, in the past a lot of data work when it comes to recruitment, so scouting, injury as well, but also, let's say, coaching, let's say, processes and methodology. So it's about the problem first. So if you have something that is working already, let's say 80-85%, are you really going to invest a couple of 100,000 or even probably more to get that to 100% when you know you have other topics when you're only at 40 or 50%, you know? So it's also about this prioritization of the topics and where you're going to put the investments, both in financial means, but also HR. Having said that, I think there's, let's say, if you look only at the sporting side, there's obviously as I was saying, the injury, the game modeling, the scouting, obviously. And just to give you one very concrete example on what we're working on, we started to work on currently at the club, is how you're going to assess or give coefficient to performance in a specific league or a specific club when you're looking at a player, and how you think this is going to translate that level of performance in another league or for instance, in the French league for Nice. Because I don't know, if you have a striker that scores, let's say, I don't know, 25 goals in the Peruvian league, for instance, and no offense to Peruvian championship, obviously, but you want to be able to know how that's going to translate in terms of performance or expected performance within the French league or Big Five European leagues, and that's something that we've just started actually very recently to work on, try to get this assessment. But I think just one last point on this, maybe that goes back to what also Luis was saying, is that probably at club level you're much stronger or you benefit the most when you have also something that drives that topic, those discussions with strategic partners at the league level. And I think when you look at what La Liga has done with the ex-La Liga Tech, which has rebranded, I think, now to Sportian, but I think that brings a lot of added value for the clubs as well, because you, again, as a club, especially if you're not PSG, looking now just at the French league, then you don't necessarily have the resources, right, to look in depth at those topics. So if you have this, let's say, at the league level, centralizing all those issues, those discussions, and then being able to accelerate potential investments, I think that drives a lot of value for the clubs.
In doing some research for this, one of the things I found interesting was most organizations right now will not have a organizational-wide AI strategy. AI is being used in their business already, whether they know it or not. So I'm sure there are members of his team that are using ChatGPT or Perplexity or something else to ask questions. And okay, they're prompting it, but one of the best tricks I learned recently was when I'm on ChatGPT, ask it to act as a prompt engineer and to ask me questions about the prompt I give it, and it starts really iterating very quickly, and like, okay. The other bit, of course, is any information that his colleagues or my colleagues or their colleagues are putting on. So if you take an Excel sheet, plug it into ChatGPT and ask it to run an analysis of it, that's great, it'll give you, it keeps the data. and it's now training its AI. So if another club then goes on and asks a question that's similar, it will learn from the data that you've provided. So at some point, you need an organizational strategy. But I think Microsoft was saying that 56% of executives, I mean, I don't know how they defined an executive, are currently using some form of Copilot in the office environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think strategy underpins how to utilize the data, right? And we've talked about executive decision making. So, Yacine, just a quick follow-up from your standpoint, like how often are you talking about strategy at club level, and who are the stakeholders that are involved in that conversation?
It's a very good one. I think, I mean, I was defending my role and position, but I think there's very few clubs, at least outside of the UK, the EPL, where you have that type of position. The truth is that we call this, let's say, strategy, but at the end, I think 50%, even more probably of the job is project management. We were just discussing this before. It's about, I think, probably at the club, at most of the clubs, you lack that, let's say, central position, able to coordinate project to the business plan, to the reporting for GM, owners, or different stakeholders, because that's one of the issues you have in clubs is that people are very specialized in their remits, in their specific, let's say, area of expertise, but sometimes you lack, let's say, a bit the ability to connect the dots, right? So I think we're also having that position at Olympique Marseille previously. That's something that we try to do, and I think hopefully brought some success to the organization, and now trying to implement the same thing in Nice. But to answer your question, it's mostly at the GM level, with the owners as well, and trying to basically get those 360 transversal, let's say, project and make it, let's say, beneficial for the club, because otherwise it's just managed on a department by department basis, and you, at least in my humble opinion, you just don't manage, let's say, to create that real added value at the club level. So hence the need for strategy, let's say, departments, and that serves both on-pitch topics, like we've been working a lot now for the academy in Nice, because we needed, let's say, a lot of restructuring there, but also for obviously off-the-pitch results, so stadium sponsorship, fan engagements, and yeah, so that's a bit the role.
Well, I mean, that's really sparked some type of curiosity for me. Perhaps I can ask the panelists, we can start with you, Michael, here, just very briefly, the ratio of leaning on data versus human emotion and empathy and the person, right? What is the ratio of decision-making involved, in your opinion, in the future in relation to football as a business?
I mean, and I invest in technologies. Technologies are a tool, right? You absolutely cannot, and I certainly wouldn't invest in anything where the human isn't making a decision, setting the vision, and so on. And okay, you use it as a tool to help you interpret the data. But I definitely see it as this is an assistant. This is to help you. You have to go into it, and Stef has raised it very eloquently, you have to go into it knowing it's biased already. The data sets that all these LLMs have been trained on are public domain, which is typically male written, quite often from universities, and therefore liberal leaning, generally speaking, and so on. And even there, they're having humans have to try and correct what the LLMs are regurgitating. And you have to remember that at the moment, what an AI is really doing on large data sets is reading the past, right? Not reading the future. And if you're trying to build a business model for the future, the stock markets will tell you this, the past does not predict the future, right? It's a lesson you need to learn from to not make, hopefully, the same mistakes again. So I think if you try to remove too much of the human element, you'll completely cock it up.
Steph, agree, disagree?
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I don't know if I could put a number on it, in terms of a percentage, but I know that right now AI is not in a place where you can 100% rely on it without some sort of human interaction, right? Even if it's the Chat GPT, 01, when you go in and put your prompts in, it's still the human element of putting the prompt in. Your prompt's gonna be a little bit different than my prompt. I wonder what your profile says, what mine says when you type in who's Stef Strack. I'm gonna do that
and
after.
I can ask it to write it. You can ask it to write it and say, okay, I want it to come back with a liberal viewpoint on it, or I want you to be very critical about Stef's career. And it will give me a completely different version of the same information.
Yeah. So I mean, I think right now, I don't know if we'll get to a place where you can rely 100% on the tool without the human interaction. Right now, though, we're really far from that, especially when you think of women's football. Because of the data, you can't go in with it with this mindset of like, I'm going to get my answer from the AI tool. So we use it today as like a way to kind of get a different perspective to accelerate what we're trying to get after.
If you trusted the data on football for women's football, it would effectively tell them to end their menstrual cycle.
Yeah. And probably not watch it because it hasn't been on TV enough. And like, I mean, there's so many inherent biases in there.
Luis, your take?
No, I fully agree, but I think also it's important that we consider another angle, right? Because again, it's true that today AI is still limited, right, in the scope of what it can do, but again, it's already a great tool. But at the speed of evolution and speed of evolution of AI, this is not going to stay like this for a long time. And then my question is, knowing the competitive nature of sport and knowing the ruthless will to win from so many organizations. In a few years when AI can maybe start impacting much more, some decisions can in fact maybe have, let's say reduce potentially, any surprise possible. Will the industry governing bodies, the industry, leadership be prepared to handle with it, right? Because many years ago, for instance, when tech started, for instance, to have an impact in football, we had to fight actually with the leadership of the sport in many different angles to effectively allow simple things like, for instance, data systems, to have a bi-directional relationship between what was happening in the pitch and, the analytic systems of the pitch in real time, right? Because if not, you cannot have data, right? So from the game in real time, the coaches used to take basically, a very non-technology-driven perspective, right? So they will arrive at half-time, somebody will show him some stuff, during 1 minute, and they need to execute decisions. Today, this is not what happens. Now, before, it was easy to control because you say you cannot do it. So, and of course, you had to go underneath sometimes if you want to do it. Today, you can say, okay, you cannot do it, good luck with that, right? So, because you're not going to be able to stop it. So, or we assume once and for all that effectively AI has a role to play and needs to be governed in a certain way, right? And we still have today time to all sit together and say, okay, what is going to be the role? Are we all going to contribute? Where it can be used and deployed? If not, it's going to be uncontrollable. And then maybe that actually may be good in a certain way on that, potential problem that we have. That effectively, let's say, maybe a really small team, that today is in a fourth league can effectively build a path to win the Champions League, right? So, and that becomes effectively, a very unlikely and different and exciting scenario. But I think we need definitely to have that discussion while we still can do it efficiently.
Yeah, well, that really would be championship manager in real life if we went from the 4th division all the way up to the Champions League.
I had a conversation with a very successful manager based in England where we were talking data sets and DNA and AI and all sorts of things. He said, it's really interesting. He said, the information is likely going to tell me, he gave me concrete examples which I can't share here. He goes, that this player is better than that player. He goes, but that one's lazy. And I want the player who's going to die for his teammates on the pitch. So regardless of the data set, what I see out there is that the others will follow him. So he's the guy who goes on the pitch. I was like, and it was the human element. He goes, statistically, I get what you mean. But I'm looking at the dynamic of 11 people on the pitch and how I'm competitive. And if I get more from the other 10 because of him, every day.
But I'll say, sorry, I will say as well on that when now we are starting, for instance, to measure brainwaves and we start to measure effectively leadership factors, in such a deep way like we are, and I'll say that we have still not seen maybe the full impact of AI because clubs have been lazy, right? That's, I'm sorry, I'm not saying, you, Yacine, sorry.
But of course not Yacine's club, of course not Yacine's club. That's why he's here on stage with us.
It's effectively something, for instance, if you just look at a club as a tech company, right? So you have the coach, which is your CTO, right? So and every time there is a coach change, there's a new coach coming, a new CTO, and says, no, I don't like this technology. I don't like all these analysts that you have here. I'm going to bring my guy because my guy is always the only guy I trust, and I only like this system because that's the only system I trust. And clubs, instead of saying, okay, you're not the right guy for me, and you have actually to use everything that I have, you have to use my methodology, you have to use my technology installment, you have to use my data lake. No, they just allow him to, and then sometimes you have 2, 3 million, 5 million, 10 million of investment that simply goes down the drain. Mm-hmm. So effectively this has been helping this situation that AI is still not where it should be in terms of impact. But as I say, it's just a question of time until someone does it better. And then, as always in football, all the other ones will try to catch up, and then we go into a war, right? So,
yeah, completely agree on what has been said. It's probably one of the two main challenges that we have, both at club level, but also any type of organization, is one, what Michael was saying before, and also Stef regarding the bias of the data, is that one, you need to have good data, but good data means quantity, because you need to have that large, let's say, massive volume to be able to really work out some insights, some valuable insights in terms of, let's say, robustness of the models that you're going to build. That's one, but also data quality. And that's an issue, because depending on the providers, also on the people that work on it at the club level, that's one of the main challenge. And the second one, sorry, maybe a bit repeating what you guys said, but it's about basically the infrastructure with a capital I at the club, both in terms of HR, so having people skilled enough, let's say, to work on these issues, on these models, and then understand, let's say, the tech component behind it, but also in terms of, let's say, of IT infrastructure that you have behind, because otherwise it's just having a standalone tool or add just one brick to the company, but without any tangible, let's say, a medium to long-term connection with the rest of the parts of the business, and it just doesn't make sense, let's say, from a long-term, let's say, perspective. So if you don't have that structure in place, it's going to be very hard for you and for us as well as a club to capitalize on this tool.
Yeah. Well, speaking of structure, Michael, just coming across to you, what do you see as some of the growth areas from an investment standpoint within that football ecosystem right now? Because obviously, club ownership, media rights, player performance, there's a smorgasbord of collateral there, right? So what do you think is the next frontier?
Honestly, particularly as it pertains to this space, it's hard to know. Generically speaking, it's easy. It's performance, but I relate performance to how do I get to what in English we refer to as middle-aged men in lycra, so mammals, all on the bicycling or Saturday afternoon football. How do I get to that market? I wear a Whoop. How do I take that to the next level? An Aura, what's that all look like when you combine that with, say, biotech, which is emerging, so you can see what your sweat levels are and how have you dehydrated and so on. I mean, all those things are coming. To how do I reach the audience? Because I haven't seen a drop-off in audience love of sport. How we engage with it has changed radically. The mistake I think we'd make is I sat on a panel talking about 5G, and all I heard from the CTOs was telling me, well, we're going to get more data feeds and more camera feeds. And I'm like, no, the way the audience is going to interact with your sport is going to radically change. And I think AI enables a radical change, just as it enabled us to go from 10 years to create a solution to COVID to 1 year. Vaccines are going to be able to be done, that you have to think about it from a different lens, that AI, whilst now is a co-pilot, could radically change how we engage with our sport.
And speaking of change, Stef, coming across to you, I mean, you work across multiple different areas of sport in general based on your Nike background, now obviously like female sport as well. Can you give us a few examples of how AI is being used to leverage brand equity to kind of really amplify sport in general?
Yeah, I will say first that, because I don't know if we'll have enough time to talk about it, but the AI systems are really only as strong as the data sets. So when we're all thinking about how we're going to create and make decisions, we really need to be thinking about Where is the data coming from? What are the biases that are naturally embedded in the data? Or even to your point, is there scarcity of that specific data set that you're trying to use? So I would say right now we're in the infancy stages for women's football and AI in terms of gathering the right amount of data in order to make these really smart AI algorithms. So, from a brand equity perspective, I've seen, I think my favorite thing is actually from the French, and as an American saying to the French, but it was last year, and it was an orange commercial. And they used deep fake, basically, to create a commercial where we, as the audience, thought we were watching men's football. And it was all these incredible shots on goal and passes and incredible moments. And then halfway through the commercial, they paused and said, isn't this the best from Les Bleus? And then the second sentence was actually like, that wasn't Les Bleus, it's the women's team. And then they went on to actually unveil, really how they leveraged AI through visual effects to make this incredible commercial. And I think that, to me, marketing and brand equity, it all comes back to, does what you're doing in marketing create a conversation? And that was an example of how Orange created a conversation, and now they're in the conversation around equity and biases and data. And it was something pretty emotional for me as a woman watching that, but I'm curious to know, for you guys, what was your original reaction?
Okay, so just in the interest of time, we're just about to hit the 30-second marker. Fantastic example there about talking and creating conversation. 15 seconds each, going to put you all on the spot. 2 years' time from now, what does the future of football look like? Luis, we'll start with you, work our way down the panel.
We don't have any time, right? No, I think the future of football, first of all, I see women's football will become much more sustainable, much bigger. I think the 27 World Cup will be an amazing event. Everything that happened anyway in North America. I also look a lot at amateur sport, and especially small-sided football. I think that's going to blow up, to the moon. So I think it's going to be big. And virtual sports, I think the Olympics, virtual games, I think that will be something so interesting to see. So I think there are some very interesting things on the pipeline that will radically, help to change, the mindset of the football community and create new sports.
Fantastic. Stef?
I'll be super short. I think the future is women's football and women's sports.
I love that.
Well, I've bet on that, so I hope so. I would say I'm still hoping that it's interaction between fans and sport and not engagement.
Yacine?
Yeah, I would say three things, but very shortly. Marginal gains on the sports performance part, so try to make it that 1% extra and get the competitive advantage. Second one is the continued rise of institutional investors, and you know that part very well. I think you're going to see more and more consolidation. And the third one is probably more innovation in terms of competition format, because in the end, you see that just yesterday again with the launch of the new Champions League, I think that drives a lot of value, both from a commercial standpoint, also bringing some issues in terms of match calendar that is already quite packed. That's a hot debate at the moment, but I think it's going to keep evolving in that direction.
Thank you. So a very elegant summary there from our panelists. As you can see, the conversation around football and AI covers many different factors. What's important at its core is to understand the data that you're looking at, the decision-making taking place, and the overarching strategy. Thank you so much to our panelists here.